You smell it before you see it. Blood in the snow, dark against the white, 30 feet ahead. Something got to the trap before you did. A wolverine, maybe. Or a wolf. Either way, the beaver is gone, and the trap is sprung, and you walk 2 miles through frozen dark for nothing. 1836. Wind River Range. You're a free trapper working alone. The nearest other human is probably a Shoshone camp, 4 days east. You have 28 traps left to check. The sun is already climbing. You pick up the trap. You keep moving. There's nothing else to do. Morning. The robe is stiff at the edges, where your breath froze overnight. You peel it back. The air hits your face like something with no opinion about whether you live. -15, maybe colder. You don't own a thermometer. You know by how fast your fingers ache when you reach for the flint. You slept on the ground. No other option. Some men build lean-tos, lodgepole pine frame, pine boughs layered thick on top, a fire angled in front to push heat inward. You built one 10 days ago. Wind took half of it by Tuesday. The buffalo robe is what keeps you alive. 2 hides, hair side in, lashed together. 11 pounds. You carry it every mile. Without it, you die in a single night. That is not a figure of speech. Breakfast. You cut a strip from the pemmican block in your pack. Dried elk meat pounded with rendered fat and choke cherries pressed into a hard, dark cake. It tastes like nothing after the first 10 days. You eat it anyway because your body is burning through calories the way a fire burns through wet wood. Fast, constant, always needing more. 4,000 calories a day at minimum in this cold. Some stretches. 5,000. The pemmican covers part of that. The rest depends on what you kill. Yesterday, you killed nothing. Water. The creek 20 yards from camp is mostly frozen. You find a thin place, break through with the rifle butt, fill the tin cup, hold it over fire coals until it's drinkable. 15 minutes. You do this twice. The water tastes of iron and mud and something you don't investigate. You don't dwell on Giardia, not because it isn't out here, but because you can't afford the thought. Half the men working the upper Missouri have it by spring. Cramping, fever, a body turning on itself at exactly the moment the snowmelt comes, and the work doubles. Frostbite moves faster than people expect. At -20, with any wind, exposed skin starts going in under 30 minutes. First it hurts, then it stops hurting. The stopping is the dangerous part. Fingers, toes, the tip of the nose, the ears. You check them throughout the day. You've watched men lose fingers to cold like this. A man you traded with at last summer's rendezvous was missing 2 toes on his right foot. Walked fine, he said. Flat, no weight behind it. The way men out here say most things, like the foot had simply made a sensible decision and he'd come around to respecting that. Your pack weighs 65 pounds. Traps, tools, pemmican, the robe, spare powder, lead, skinning knife, backup knife, small axe. No luxury items. There are no luxury items. The men who came west chasing some idea of freedom, no employer, open sky, nobody's schedule but their own, figured out what that costs inside the first month. The freedom is real. So is everything required to keep yourself alive inside it. Most days you cover 12 to 15 miles across terrain that is not flat, not marked, and not interested in your survival. You wear moccasins. Hard-soled boots crack and stiffen in this cold. A Crow man demonstrated that to one of your partners last winter. The lesson was a nearly lost foot. By midday you've checked 8 traps on the eastern line. 2 beaver. 1 muskrat you'll keep because fresh meat is running low. 1 trap sprung overnight. Something got there first and cleaned it out. All that's left is a dark smear on the ice and a scrap of fur caught in the jaw. You can't tell what took it. You reset the trap. You move on. The physical condition this life requires is not something you trained for. It is something you either arrived with, built during the first season if you survived it, or failed to build and then left. Your hands have calloused past the point of registering most textures. Your shoulders stopped hurting the way they did in October because the pain became permanent and your body stopped classifying it as a problem. You sleep hard every night. You wake tired every morning. You go out again. Here is the thing no one mentions before you come out here. The nearest trading post, Fort Union, if you're on the upper Missouri, Bent's Fort further south, is 6 weeks away on foot, 8 in deep snow. Everything you need for the next 8 months is either on your back or cached near camp. Powder runs out, you improvise, or you starve. Rifle breaks, same answer, there is no resupply, there is no one coming. You understood that in St. Louis. Out here in this frozen canyon, the cold working through every gap in your coat, you understand it somewhere deeper than understanding. The trap line runs 2 miles along the river, 43 traps in water between 8 inches and 2 feet deep, set where the bottom sediment shows beaver sign, channels pressed into mud, stripped branches, the dark slide of an entry point at the bank's edge. You learned to read this from a flathead man who charged you nothing and expected you to watch carefully and not ask questions twice. You watched. You asked once. Setting a trap takes 12 minutes when your hands are working right. In February, they are not working right. You position the flat pan below the water line, stake the chain to the bank with an iron pin, hang a small stick daubed with castoreum, the beaver's own scent gland oil, all harvested from a previous catch, just above the water's surface. The beaver surfaces to investigate. It steps on the pan. The spring snaps. The chain holds it under. Drowning takes 4 minutes. By the time you arrive in the morning, the cold has done the rest. You check every trap every day regardless of weather. A trap left longer grows ice. A beaver left longer gets taken. 43 traps, 2 miles, every morning before the light is full. You learn to move in the dark. You learn which sections of ice hold weight and which don't. You learn this by falling through once in October in chest-deep water with the camp a mile away. You don't fall through again. Navigation. You have no map because no accurate map exists. The Rockies in 1831 are known in outline and wrong in detail. What you have is a mental model built from landmarks, a specific ridgeline profile, the angle of a canyon mouth, the direction a creek bends after a named fork. Miss a landmark in poor visibility, and you can work 2 days up the wrong drainage before the terrain stops making sense. 2 days. In winter. Alone. You back out and lose 4 days total. You file that away and don't make the same mistake twice, because twice might be the end of the accounting. The sky in the northern Rockies can turn inside an hour. Morning, clear. Noon, a high, thin overcast you've learned to read as a warning. By 2 in the afternoon, the wind is up and the temperature has dropped 15 degrees and the snow is coming sideways and you cannot see the far bank of the river. You know where camp is. You walk toward it without stopping. Now, you don't stop because stopping is how men out here die. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a brief rest that becomes a longer rest and then a final one. You've heard 2 versions of this story. Both end the same way. Grizzly bears are not rare out here. They are a feature of the terrain the way the river is a feature of the terrain. In spring, they're moving and hungry. In fall, they're moving and desperate. A boar grizzly at full weight runs faster than any horse for the first 100 yards. You carry a rifle, 1 shot, muzzle load, 20 seconds minimum to reload. Every man who works these mountains has a version of the same plan for what to do if a bear charges. Fire, hope, move. Most men have a scar somewhere. Some men have worse than a scar. Wolves follow your trap line for the same reason you do. Easy food. When you learn to recognize their tracks, you reset sprung traps. You keep moving regardless. Here is what this life requires you to know simultaneously. How to set and maintain 40 traps, how to read water for beaver sign, how to navigate by landmark in whiteout conditions, how to read weather well enough to move before it turns, how to field dress and skin 3 different animals, how to manage a fire in wet cold, how to treat a wound with no supplies, how to find food when your food supply runs out. You need all of this from day one. There is no apprenticeship. There is no one to ask. There is only what you know and what the mountains cost you for not knowing it. Most free trappers last 3 to 5 years, not because they choose to quit, because something ends it. Injury, illness, a winter that runs harder than expected. A deep cut from a skinning knife goes septic in 4 days without proper cleaning, and there is no proper cleaning out here. A broken leg is not an injury. A broken leg alone, 6 weeks from the nearest post, is a death with extra steps. You've set your own dislocated shoulder once against a pine trunk by feel. You try not to think about what happens if the problem is worse than that. Summer, July, the rendezvous. Every year the fur companies designated a valley, Pierre's Hole, Horse Creek, the Green River, and sent supply wagons west from St. Louis loaded with everything a trapper needed. Powder, lead, blankets, traps, coffee, sugar. They also sent whiskey. A great deal of whiskey. You arrive with your winter's take. A good season means 80 or 90 beaver plues, pelts dried and pressed flat, each worth $4 back in St. A Louis. Here at the rendezvous, the company buys them for $2, sells you a pound of coffee for $2, charges $3 for a pint of whiskey that costs the company 30 cents to produce. The arrangement works like a company store at a coal mine. You earn in one currency and spend in another, and the same people set the rate on both sides. Most men arrive at the rendezvous with a year's earnings and leave with nothing or less than nothing, not because they lack judgment, because the structure is designed to produce that result. You spend 3 days there. You eat real food, sleep without one ear open, talk to other men whose voices you had nearly forgotten the sound of. You drink. You spend. By the end of day 2, 6 months of work is gone. By day 3, you're signing over next season's catch to cover this season's supplies. You ride back into the mountains already in debt to the next winter. The relationship between free trappers and native nations in these mountains is not a clean story, and anyone who tells it simply is cutting most of it out. You depend on Crow and Shoshone and Flathead knowledge to function, their reading of terrain, weather, animal movement, routes through passes that no white map had accurately recorded. You trade with them, winter near their camps sometimes, marry into their communities more often than the histories later chose to note. You also move through a frontier system that is methodically taking their land. You know this, and don't know it at the same time. Nobody out here is thinking in decades. You're thinking about whether the pass is still open. Violence moves in both directions and is not clean in either. Men you know have been killed. Men you know have killed. You don't discuss it at length. Estimated mortality among free trappers in the northern Rockies during this period, between 30 and 40% dead before 35, from violence or exposure. You are 24. You try not to do the arithmetic. In 1823, Hugh Glass was mauled by a grizzly in present-day South Dakota. His party left him, took his rifle, his knife, and moved on. He had a broken leg, exposed bone, wounds going septic in the open air. He crawled roughly 200 miles to Fort Kiowa over the following 6 weeks. He ate berries, roots, a rattlesnake he killed with a rock he could barely lift. He survived. This story moved through the mountains for years because it was exceptional. The unexceptional stories had no one left to carry them. On 3rd week of February, alone in camp, you realize you have stopped talking out loud and are not sure when that happened. A journal from an 1835 winter encampment on the Bighorn River describes a man writing the same sentence 4 times in a row without noticing. Another journal from the same period goes silent for 11 days, then resumes mid-sentence with no explanation. Nobody came to check on either of them. Nobody was coming. Then you're back, standing somewhere warm, your original clothes. The smell of something cooked nearby, still in the air. It takes a moment before you stop listening for wind. What those men produced is documented fact. Jedediah Smith crossed the Sierra Nevada. The South Pass through the Rockies, the low, gradual grade that the Oregon Trail would follow, on that carried more than 300,000 settlers west over the following 2 decades, was identified and made usable by men following beaver. They opened the interior of a continent. The maps that replaced their mental models were drawn on top of their roots. Who they were is also documented. Mostly young, mostly broke. Median age at entry close to 20, most lasting under 5 years in the trade. The beaver felt hat market collapsed in 1840 when European fashion shifted to silk. The men the industry had consumed were already gone or going before that. The mythology, the solitary hero, the coonskin cap, the man who needed nothing from anyone, was assembled afterward by people who hadn't been there. They needed everyone. They just rarely had anyone. You think about that on the way home. You're not sure what to do with it. You don't think they would have known either.